Good? Okay, great. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for having me out here tonight. I've been down here in South Florida for almost a year, not quite, and I figured it was about time to get out and meet some of the game dev community. So Pedro hit me up a number of weeks ago, actually, probably over a month ago, and I thought, yeah, this would be great. I'll come out and maybe give a little bit of my history, show a little project I'm working on. And I thought, yeah, I got loads of time, weeks and weeks of time. I can prepare, and it'll be great. We'll have all sorts of visual aids and what have you. But, of course, time ran away, and it's been super busy at work, and I'm pretty much winging it tonight. So I have some really plain, boring slides that are pretty much just like my notes. So we'll go through those, and we'll talk about my history, how I ended up down here, some of the things that I've done in the past, and then I'm going to try to awkwardly segue that into the project that I'm working on currently at home. It's more of a personal project. So yeah, let's see what the first slide is. Okay, so this is my little blurb off of the website I've got here. So I consider myself a multifaceted game developer with extensive experience in game design and content creation. So I started coming up through the art channel, did a lot of game design early on, went back to it. And yeah, I've worked on arcade games, console games, PC, mobile, slot machines, VR, and now spatial computing. And I like to put in there, I'm a true believer in the power of production value, and we can maybe talk about that. And my favorite game is probably Dark Souls, one of my favorite games, so I always like to throw a little get good on the bottom there. All right, so yeah, I recently realized, oh wait, hold up, let's stop. So I'm presently employed by Magic Leap. I'm not going to talk about Magic Leap at all, other than the fact that I work there, and if we want to talk about how I got into the company, we can do that. But anything related to the technology, what we're doing, is like off limits. I'm not authorized to speak to that. So go ahead and ask the questions about it, and I will politely refuse to answer. So yeah, I recently realized that I have been making games professionally for 25 years, which came as kind of a surprise to me. It went really fast. I started out doing 2D art and then moved into 3D and also animation as well. And that was with Incredible Technologies, which is a small company up in northern Illinois. I was going to school at the time at a community college and didn't really have much of a direction at that point. Like, I'd always done artwork, I'd always loved video games. And the school had just kicked off their first computer art program. So I managed to get into that, and we learned a software called DPaint, which you've probably never heard of. But it's an ancient piece of software that started out as an internal electronic arts tool that they then released to the masses. So anyway, the school I was at was teaching this. This company came by one day and said, hey, we need folks that know this software. Maybe some of you would like to come and interview. So I did. I went and interviewed, and somehow managed to get in the door. I showed off my portfolio disc, which was, what are they, 1.4 megs they were back then, and showed the company the exact same class examples that everyone else went and showed. So we had to do like a pseudo 3D rendered egg and some sort of like simple animation. And so by the time I got there, they're like, okay, go ahead, show us the egg. Show us the animation. They'd seen it all before. But I like to think the thing that got me through the door was, again, as I said, I was always doing art and drawing and sketching, and I had a pile of papers, not even like really a professional portfolio. The night before the interview, I was taking all these crumpled up pages and like gently ironing them out, trying to make them nice and smooth. But I think that some of the artwork that I had on those sheets, when I showed it to them and explained, all these different characters and the backstories that I had behind them and all the different types of games that I'd want to make with them, I think that's what kind of got me in the door. So yeah, I worked there for about 5.5 years, and a great place. They're still in business today. I think at the time I was like the 33rd employee or something, and it was run by a husband and wife, and still is today. Very small shop, but they had achieved a great deal of success right at the sort of front edge of the fighting game craze. They had done a game called Time Killers, which, if you look it up, is it's probably not the greatest game. It's not really known as like a real solid fighting game, but what it did do really well was they had custom hardware that was able to show a tremendous amount of colors on screen. And so operators are the folks that put arcade games into arcades. Operators were starving for any kind of fighting game content, so they did extremely, extremely well. And as a matter of fact, I think it was the day before my first day on the job, I had gone, this is up in Chicago if I had not mentioned that, I had gone downtown Chicago, and there was an arcade there, and I stopped in, and it was with my girlfriend at the time, and we're going through all the games, and there was Time Killers. I'd never actually seen it before. And it was this, the two characters, and the background was this like dinosaur, this like dead dinosaur that was kind of like keeled over and there's blood pouring out of it and like spears stuck in it. And it was like the most amazing piece of 2D art I had ever seen. It was like multi-layered, so like as the characters move, it gives like this sense of depth. And I just thought like, I'm gonna last a week here, and then they're gonna find out like I can't do that, and I'm out of here. But yeah, luckily I stuck with it and found out that there's a lot of tricks employed in the game industry. So yeah, my first gig at Incredible Technology, I was actually hired to do the fighting game that they were working on at the time, which was like the pseudo sequel to Time Killers, since I was such a fighting game maniac at the time. But I ended up working on their football game. It was their first sports game. I think NBA Jam had like really just taken off, and so the company had thought, well, what other sport can we do? Let's do football. So it was supposed to be a wild and crazy, over-the-top football game, and that was called Hard Yardage. And my first job was to take these digitized images and draw stripes on the pants. So like I'd go to work, and like every day I would get into deep paint, I'd load in my first frame, and I'd draw the stripe on the pants using the particular palette color so that we could do the different teams and all this. And I was just like the happiest dude you could ever imagine. This was like dream come true. I'm making video games. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of work. So yeah, anyway, I'm getting a little sidetracked. We'll go through like my game history. But after Incredible Technologies, I went to Midway, which you may be familiar with, maybe not. They no longer exist, but at the time they were like the #1 arcade game developer, like I considered, in the world. Like they did the best stuff, NBA Jam. They went on to do Blitz, and then there's all the history, like Robotron. My favorite game of all time is Joust, and the precursor to Midway, Williams had done Joust. So I was working in the same buildings like Mark Trammell and Sal DeVita and Ed Boon and Eugene Jarvis and all that. So that was an amazing, amazing experience. So around that time, I think, so I went on, I initially got hired to do like some crazy spline-based work that we were going to do for the new PS2 at the time, and we are going to do a new version of Blitz using this spline-based technology. That didn't pan out, and so they started the sports division, so I went and led the red card soccer team. But then after a while, after that project, I realized that games are getting more and more difficult to make, and there was this whole technical aspect that people just weren't prepared to deal with yet. We were moving into 3D, and there's just way, way different than making 2D stuff. So I started focusing on the technical aspects of creating content, and so I invented a role for myself as the technical artist for the sports department, and did that for a few years. Following that, I went to Day One Studios, where I was also a technical artist there, and they are the company. They are no longer around. They are now part of, who are the tank people? World of Tanks. Wargaming, yeah. They were purchased by Wargaming. But I went to work on Mech Assault 2, which is like a giant robot fighting game. So after going down, part of the reason I went down this technical art path was because I really wanted to get back to game design, because that's where my real passion is. And I saw that as games were getting more complex and the teams were getting larger and larger, there was this element of scripting happening, right? Like game designers were starting to do scripting. And so I thought, well, there's a lot of scripting that can be done in technical art, so I learned how to do Max script in 3D Studio Max, figuring that would be like a good gateway to, since I'm not a programmer, I've never had any programming training, this might be a good way to kind of get in the door to learn some scripting. That didn't quite pan out, and I kept getting further and further down the road of this technical art thing. An opportunity came up with Incredible Technologies yet again to go back as a game designer. So I did that for a while. We can talk about some of those titles. I left and went indie for exactly a year until all the money ran out, and that's quite a tale. So any indie developers here, like doing your own thing? Yeah? Okay. And then I should have asked at the beginning. So who is employed at like a game developer now? Like, well, yes, you, of course.
Self-employed.
Well, but like, I I guess, yeah, other than indie, more of like, maybe, I'll say AAA, I guess. Anyone doing that sort of thing? Yeah? No? Okay. All right, cool. Excuse me. All right, that's good, because I like to speak about my indie experience more than probably some of this other stuff, because I learned a tremendous amount from doing that. So any of you that have done that, hopefully I'll have some nuggets of information to share there. But anyway, so yeah, as I mentioned, doing the indie thing, I pretty much had spent every single penny I had ever earned and then some, and needed full-time work. And an opportunity at Epic Games came up. I had tremendous amounts of respect at Epic Games and figured, quite honestly, once I saw Gears of War, I was like, that's it, I'm going to go work at Epic Games one day. The same way that when I started out my career and I saw the games from Midway, when I saw like Mortal Kombat, I was like, that's it, I'm going to work at Midway at some point. So the opportunity at Epic came up, and got in there somehow and stayed there for 3 years. And that led me now to Magic Leap. Like I said, I've been with Magic Leap for 1 year. Yeah, so let's go through, this is my title history. This is kind of pretty much everything that has either shipped or been seen publicly, I guess, or been out there, like some of the arcade stuff, we actually put out on test. So, yeah, I had mentioned Hard Yardage, the very first game I worked on. The game that became known as Bloodstorm was the thing I was originally hired for. It's really interesting to go back and think about like how games morph and evolve as they're developed. When I interviewed at Incredible Technologies and I saw the game that would become Bloodstorm, it was wildly different. It was like it was all placeholder art, and it was all like elemental characters and stuff. And then eventually, after like Mortal Kombat 2 came out and we were still working on it, it took this like super violent turn. But yeah, not the greatest game in the world, but I learned a ton on that project. I worked on the Time Killers port to the Sega Genesis. Not the most lucrative project I've ever worked on, not yet anyway. So we worked on this, and it had the way that they put the art together for the original arcade was pretty nuts. So they drew every single frame on multiple sheets of paper. So there was a sheet of paper for the body, a sheet of paper for the legs, a sheet of paper for left arm, right arm, and then one for the head. And all of that was colored with colored pencils and then scanned in and tweaked and then reassembled in one of the tools that they had. So this explains why it animates the way that it does. But it also allowed them to do their key feature, which was like cutting off limbs and stuff. So anyway, my job at the time was to take these pieces of art from the coin-op and shrink them down to Sega Genesis size. So I was getting like pieces of art back that were like 2 pixels, and it was like, yeah, that's the back arm, or 6 pixels, that was the front arm. And then I think the game got shelved because by the time we got it finished, that era was like almost nearly over. It was like petering out. But many years later, just before I left Incredible Technologies, everyone that worked on it were given a copy, like a boxed copy of it. And now I see that a complete box copy of Time Killers for Sega Genesis goes for like close to $200 on eBay. So you can bet that thing's going up there soon. So I'll get some money for all that work that I did up there. Street Fighter the movie is probably the most notorious game I worked on, and we could probably do a whole presentation on that if anyone's interested at this point. But we were hired, the short story is we were hired to fly down to Australia and digitize all of the actors from the movie to do a new Street Fighter game that was supposed to compete with the digitized graphics of Mortal Kombat 2. That was a bit of a boondoggle. The game didn't quite turn out as well as we had hoped. If you've ever played it, it is on MAME. It's quite different from the Sega Saturn and PlayStation version that came out around the same time. So if you want to play the actual arcade version, check it out on MAME. So yeah, then this is where I did my tech art stint in Midway doing, oh no, actually that's not true. So Big League Baseball was a collaboration with Midway and Incredible Technologies to do an over-the-top baseball game. We actually did put that one out on test, but it ended up not performing well, so we never shipped it. But that's when I moved to Midway and did all the tech art stuff there for all these various games, NFL Blitz, Slugfest, and then moved to MechAssault 2. And then we worked on a game that was originally going to be like part of the whole BattleTech universe thing. And it went through many different versions. It was going to be like this open world, and you could like hijack mechs and stomp around this island and hide out in cities and snipe mech pilots and all this good stuff. And then over time it changed and morphed And we ended up doing a publishing deal with LucasArts, and it got turned into Fracture, which is like a completely different game at that point, which is also an interesting title. The big piece of technology in that was that you could actually like deform the ground, and so the idea was like you'd be able to make cover and all this good stuff. But for a shooting game, being able to actually like create cover and obscure your view is like probably not the best design decision. So a couple of design related features we should have thought through a bit more clearly. Yeah, then I worked on Fear, and then what became Fear with a 3 in it, very late 2000s extreme type of naming there. And then I went back and I started working in design again. So I worked on CoinOp, and at this point, CoinOp arcades weren't really a thing anymore. They were morphing more into the Chuck E. Cheese style of like kitty redemption thing. But Incredible Technologies had found a niche in doing games for the bar market. So if you've seen Golden Tee Golf, they're still putting out Golden Tee Golf every year, makes millions and millions of dollars. We did the mini golf version of that. We dipped our toes into iPhone stuff, so that was my iPhone experience. I Spy was this really bad like magnifying app. Popcorn Report, I almost left this one off because it's so ridiculous. It's like, at the time, like the fart apps were like really popular, and like anything you put on the store was like selling gangbusters. And so someone had the idea of like, well, what if? Because people were like always cooking popcorn in the office kitchen, right? Like, what if you had an app and like you could put it up there when you're popping your popcorn, and it would count how many kernels of corn you had at the end. Whoa, like we need to do this, right? And we're just, all of us real game designer guys are just like, okay, but that's what the boss wanted, so that's what we did. Needless to say, it didn't break any sales records, or actually, I don't know if it actually registered on the sales chart. But then we did iQuarters, which was taking a virtual quarter and like doing trick shots into different like shot glasses and whatever, and that actually did really, really well. Particularly for early on. So we sold several 100,000 of those. But it was a long haul, and it was I think it was taking a lot longer than the powers that be expected an iPhone game to take. And so we kind of, we then transitioned into slot machines. So, am I boring all y'all with all this? No? Okay. All right, I'll continue. So, slot machines. I never ever wanted to get into slot machines, not because of any sort of like moral objection or anything like that. If people want to spend their money on that, that's fine. But when I was at Midway, so we had the Midway office over here on one side of the street, and then the other side of the street was Williams. And Williams had started up their slot machine business. And again, this was like early 2000s, so the technology for slot machines was like super, you look at it now, it's like, how does that even run? It's like 2D, super low res, no performance, like these things had nothing powering them. And this is going to sound really, really horrible, but when we started doing the sports department stuff and transitioning to PlayStation 2 and GameCube and Xbox, it was really hard. It was extremely difficult to create content for these things. And there were a number of folks that didn't quite keep up with the technology. And so, we tried them out in like different positions within the company, but eventually, people left and had to find new work. So a number of them would like walk across the street and then go work on slot machines. And I have a different view of it now, but at the time, gosh, this sounds so horrible. At the time, I thought, wow, like if you can't really hack it, like then you go make slot machines, right? Like I don't want to do that. I don't ever want to do that. So then years later, I find out I'm going to be making slot machines. So I wasn't like super thrilled at the idea, but I was actually kind of annoyed really because, for me, as I said earlier, game design is like my real passion. Like coming up with different game mechanics and figuring out how different systems should work together. Like that's what I'm really into. And a slot machine is like the exact opposite of that. There's like game design on a slot machine is completely different. There is no choice. There is no agency that the player has. You have to give the player of a slot machine this idea or this feeling that they have the ability to make a meaningful decision. But really they don't. And so I really wasn't interested in that. So I figured, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'll tell you what, I'll do like one game and then that's it. And like, I'll do it and I'm done. So I ended up doing Mahjong Dynasty, which was a skin of an existing game that they had. So I don't really count that as like my game. Pinup was a skin of Mahjong Dynasty. So in the slot machine biz, what happens is you come up with a math model that determines all your payouts, and then you have like a skin on top of it. You have the graphics and all the presentation. And if a game is successful, then what you do is you take and you reskin that game, because getting all the math certified, it goes through this huge process where it has to be sent off in each jurisdiction and verified that you're not cheating the player. So contrary to popular belief, slot machines do not cheat the player at all. Everything is right up front. So anyway, it's a huge process, very, very expensive. If the math comes back and it's bad, it has to do a whole new circuit, and it costs tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So anyway, that was Mahjong and Pinup, basically a skin of somebody else's game. So I was kind of fed up with it at this point. I thought, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do one game and that's it, and I'm going to do just like the game that I would want to play. If I was going to go into a casino, which at the point I think I'd been in two. If I was going to go in and play a slot machine, this is the game I want to play, and that was King of Bling, which was like a hip-hop rap theme game, which, to my knowledge, had not ever really been done before. And I'm actually quite proud of this, because it was hard. It was really hard to convince the powers that be that the audience was going to like connect with this thing, because the general perception is like the audience of a slot machine is like the elderly, like your grandmother and what have you. So doing something that was like cool and hip as I could make it, which is not that cool and hip, was a challenge to promote within the company. But we got it done, and we had to fight for resources along the way and all this, but we got it done, and it turned out to be, I'm not ashamed to say, very successful. At last I heard they're still selling these out there, and this is like probably 8 years later, which is like almost, it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. So yeah, maybe later we can fire up the YouTube video of that. Like I said, I was hoping to have more visual aids for you today, because I think this would be a fun one to watch. So at the end of the presentation, we'll take a look at it. Then I went on to do Ultra Mega, which is a pixel, like a retro graphics voxel themed game, which utterly bombed. We put it out there, and like no one wanted to play it because they didn't get it. Like the whole, I don't think the audience was quite that young. Oh yeah, I should circle back to King of Bling real quick. So by far and large, the biggest fans that we saw playing King of Bling were the little old ladies. They just loved it. Like, we expected it was going to be like a younger crowd in the casino, but it was like the older folks. And I think that was because they wanted to feel cool and be in touch with what's going on out there in the world, even though I was probably like 10 years behind the time with like featuring Lil Jon style characters and stuff. But yeah, anyway, with Ultra Mega, didn't really connect with anybody. They yanked that. We made King of Bling Iced Out, which was like the sequel, and I ended up leaving the company before it was actually finished, so the release of that didn't go so hot. All right, so that brings us on to Castle Breakers, which I went indie after that. So I spent 2 or 3 months learning Unity, and experimented with a couple of other things. There was a 2D engine, Corona, I think. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Corona, it was a few years ago. 2D engine for phones. And real quick, I'll show you what I put together for that. It's not here. So I was like, it'd be cool. I was really into, you'll notice a recurring theme, like I'm into voxels, like I dig voxels. So after I left the company, I made this as kind of a proof of concept that you could do this voxelized style fighter. And this is going to be rendered out in 2D, right? Because Corona is a 2D engine. So this was animated in 3D Studio Max. I wrote a Max script that basically took the skin character and created a voxel grid, and then figured out which ones were being intersected, and left those and deleted all the rest. You can see it's pretty messy, but it worked, and it was kind of cool. But had some trouble getting it into Corona, and then I think right around that time Unity was the PC version came out, and so I started learning that. And I put together Castle Breakers, which was an idea that I had years ago, which was basically, are you familiar with the old block breaker games like Arkanoid and Breakout and what have you? They're always fairly abstract, having these, crazy like little spaceships and blocks and whatever. So I wanted to do a 3D version of that, but it was going to take place in a castle, and you were going to be a knight with your sword, and you would like have to whack the ball and send it up and break all the like crates and fortifications of the castle and knock over these like little barbarians and stuff. And I put that together pretty quick actually, and did a Kickstarter, which was probably one of the worst ideas I've ever had. Has anyone here done a Kickstarter before? How'd it go?
I did Indiegogo. It was like,
okay,
we got like 0.1% of our goal.
Yeah.
I can find my mom.
So, I mean, it might not even be worth talking about at this point because Kickstarter kind of seems like a non-issue. Like, I think everyone's kind of realized that it's not really what it set out to be originally. But, yeah, the issue that I found, two big issues I found with Kickstarter were, so I know what it costs to make a game because I've been in the industry for a while. And so when I'm looking at Castle Breakers, I'm like, okay, I need this and this and whatever. And it's like, okay, the price tag for me to do this for a year is probably going to be around $150,000, right? People look at that and they're like, you're insane. You're like, what are you talking about? That's like a $15,000 game, right? Like people at the time, I think maybe folks are more educated on the matter now, but at the time, the expectation of your Kickstarter backer was wildly different. So then it's like, okay, where can I trim? Can I really do it? And maybe I just need to get enough money to get a demo done and then get publisher interest and whatever. So I kept paring it back and back, and I eventually landed on the number of like $65,000 or something, which would have kept me afloat for a little while longer. But yeah, the Kickstarter just failed to launch. It was, I think at the time, that was right around the time I launched my Twitter account, so I had like 200 followers, and it's just impossible to get up above the noise. So yeah, as I previously mentioned, I pretty much spent, over the course of that year, like every single penny I had ever made went into, regular bills, paying the mortgage and buying things like groceries that things like kids need and what have you. So it was from there that I went out to Epic, and which was a fabulous experience. I'm not just saying that because our friends from Epic are here in the building today, but no, Epic is a fantastic place, and learned tremendous. I learned a tremendous amount being there. My position there was DevRel tech artist. So after doing the design thing, went back kind of into the tech art realm, where I and the other tech artists, DevRel tech artists, flew around, visiting folks, giving presentations. It looks like I've lost my connection to the internet. See if this works. Maybe not. All right, hold up. Let's try to reconnect again. All right, so I'm going, that's about like what, 25 minutes so far? We'll get on to the good stuff in a second. And all right, I have no connection, so we're just going to have to look at it in this mode. All right, so yeah, did DevRel Tech Art there, going out visiting clients, giving them their crash course into Unreal when they first started out with the engine. Yeah, I can do my phone too. All right.
Let's save them my phone and pause this.
Okay. Oh wait, I might be live. No. Yes.
There you go.
Okay, I'm back. All right, cool. Yeah, and are you going again?
You don't need the Wi-Fi?
I'm good. I got back on. All right, cool. All right, so in addition to providing support to licensees, I also had the opportunity to jump on a few projects. So I did a little bit of effects work on Paragon, almost not enough to mention. I worked on Bullet Train, doing some, a little bit of content creation, a little bit of like level blocking stuff. Oh, I did some of the helped out with some of the intro tutorial, like HUD display. Unreal Tournament, I did some background effects and content there. And then we also did samples in the DevRel tech art role. So I worked on Unreal Match 3, which was a sample that we gave away for free. You can download it on the store, and it shows you how to do 2D and 3D gameplay. And Multiplayer Shootout, which was the first example of Blueprint network communication. It's kind of a gunslinger thing. That was pretty fun. All right. So thank you for bearing with me through all of that. That was like 25 years worth of stuff. So. All right, so this is the awkward segue into my current project. So throughout my career, something that's like super important to me personally are personal projects. And really for a number of reasons, and you can see them here. So they allow you to stretch creatively, and you can learn new skills. I mean, I've done things that I've done as a course of taking on these personal projects have helped me out in my professional career. This is like information skills and techniques that you can bring to work, and take on new challenges. And then also, the big solid point on the bottom there is future opportunities. In thinking about like what I was going to talk about tonight, I was wondering, like, do I need to have a theme with this? Like, should I be preaching? I feel like I'm preaching too much already. But the topic that I was going to try to like tie all this back into was like opportunity, like creating opportunity, taking advantage of opportunities that present themselves. And so, for example, when I was at Midway, we were doing the sports things, and much like slot machines were never a thing I wanted to get into, sports games were a thing I never wanted to get into. And so I found myself making sports games. And so to keep sane, I started up, this side project or personal project. And I had partnered with another employee, and we began working on this thing, and we learned a whole bunch about how to skin characters and do network stuff and on consoles. But then the biggest thing that came out of it was we had a representative from Autodesk come in, because 3D Studio Max was like still pretty early on in its life cycle, and so we were being visited by them because they wanted to get into Midway since it was like one of the big developers. And so I went and spoke to this person. I said, hey, I've got this thing going on the side here. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I really need access to 3D Studio Max. Like, what can I do? And she was like, oh, okay, well, I'll get you on the beta. So I got beta copies of 3D Studio Max for like years later. So this ended up saving me thousands and thousands of dollars over the years. Like, I think Max retails for like $3,500 or something maybe. But by just creating this project and being able to show it and talk about it and express my passion for it, this rep saw something there. And again, that was like an opportunity that I was able to create and then leverage and help myself out. And through having access to 3D Studio Max at home, that's what aided me in my tech art career. Like, I was, I'm really trying to find a way to say this without sounding like totally conceited, but I had a lot of 3D Studio Max knowledge, and so I became the guy that people go to when, transforms were wrong, or, bones were flipping and skinning was messed up and all that, right? So that was one example of the whole opportunity thing. And then, so I've always been kind of working on or thinking about other projects, and then when I got to, in between, I guess when I went indie, so let me roll this back. You have to be very careful about personal projects when you work at a large developer, because they typically want to own or claim rights over all of your ideas. So it's really, really important if you're going to embark on these things that you understand what your employment agreement says. So I guess this is like my big nugget, hopefully I have more nuggets of information tonight, but this is one big nugget. Understand your employment contract and what you own versus what they own. Now, I guess it's okay to speak ill of this company since they are no longer with us, but at Midway, when we were doing the sports stuff, so you've taken this whole group of guys that have done these fantastic arcade games, like for, well, some of them almost their whole lives, and made tons and tons of money for themselves, for the company, and been like super creative, and now you're going to make them do sports titles to try to compete with the likes of EA that have like unlimited funds, right? So a lot of folks weren't too pleased with that. And there was a lot of discontent within the studio. So finally, upper management called a meeting, and we all sat in a room kind of like this, but probably like 3 times, well, maybe this size. There was hundreds of us in there, and talking about, he was laying down the law, like, we are going to do this, we're going to move forward, yada yada, giving the whole thing. And it came time for the Q&A, and somebody said, well, what if I have an idea, that I want to make, and you say, we're never doing those types of games anymore. Can I go off and make that? And he said, absolutely not. I own every idea that you have. I own your dreams. Like, literally said this in front, and apparently this is not the first time this guy had said this to the employees. So it may not be a surprise that morale was a little bit low after that. I can't say for sure. Maybe the atmosphere contributed to the demise of the company. I don't know. That's probably not fair to say because they went on to do, after the sports thing kind of fizzled, they did kind of branch out and do like some really, really cool projects after I had left, like PsyOps. There was like some crazy Vegas game in the works. And then there was like a superhero thing that was like super, super cool. So they did kind of get back to doing like really cool creative stuff. But anyway, this is all to say, to get back on topic, yes, be aware of what your employment contracts say. A good company will allow you to basically carve out, they have an area within the agreement that where you can state what you own, what IP you have, what ideas you have ahead of going into the company so that you can retain those rights. I know some folks, they're just like, whatever, like I'm never going to make that game anyhow, so I'm not going to fill it out. But I strongly encourage you to do so. You never know, again, like what opportunities may come up. So in my case, you saw the little pixel fighting guy, right? So at each company I've been to since then, I've said, I'm going to work on at some point, I have this Voxel Fighting Game thing, and I don't know what it's going to be, but this is it, and whatever. So like that is now as protected as it can be. So Magic Leap also has these these clauses about ownership, but since I was able to carve that out and own that, I'm continuing. I started that project back up, all brand new in real-time 3D, and I've been working on that on my nights after hours. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I started doing like research on this, I guess, last fall, winter. I knew I wanted to do voxel stuff because I thought I had a cool look. I'd done 2 voxel games at this point that had both failed. So yeah, I had mentioned the voxel slot machine, which failed miserably, and then Castle Breakers was also done in a voxel style, and that didn't do so well either. So I'm like, okay, 3rd time's a charm. I'm going to work on this thing, and if it goes nowhere, if people don't like it, I'm never going to do voxel art ever again. So this is like my last stab at it. But so yeah, I'll just go ahead and I guess I'll hit play to start with here. And so we got our fighting game characters. I would let you play, but this is a lot of smoke and mirrors at this point, and it's really kind of busted and broken. So I will retain control of the keyboard for the moment. But yeah, so really what's going on here, this is all real time. So actually, let's go ahead and we'll play in viewport, and then I'll kick out here, and you can see this is all real time. Not the 2D rendered stuff that I was originally doing so many years ago. So what we're looking at here is the pipeline for this is like, quite honestly, super, super tedious. So I start out with a skinned character in 3D Studio Max, and I create my animations. And well, maybe I should roll back to like what the goals are here. I used to love fighting games, and part of what got me started in the industry was my passion for fighting games. Fighting games of today are utterly amazing, like all the new games that have come out, Street Fighter V and Marvel vs. Capcom, like they look gorgeous, but the gameplay is like, I'm old school. Like some of the way that the new games animate are too hard for me to follow. I like that real distinct frame by frame animation style where if you could read the frame, you knew what the right reaction is. It seems to me that fighting games have really gone kind of down this path where it's all about reaction speed rather than reacting with the right piece of knowledge, right? So I'm going totally old school with this right now, and animating in a way that is very similar to the way that we animated way back when I did my first fighting games. None of us were professionally trained animators or any of that stuff. Like, you made stuff move, and we didn't have a lot of experience doing weight and timing. I know a little bit more about that now. I don't consider myself a real animator, but I can make stuff move on screen. So yeah, kind of what happens here is I have a skin character in 3D Studio Max, and he's got it's kind of hard to describe, but it looks like super funky. He's got all of these different areas of them blocked off in like different solid colors, because what happens is I animate, and then every so many frames I spit out a static mesh of that pose, and then that static mesh gets imported into an application called Cubicle, if you've heard of that. If you've heard of Magic of Voxel, it's like a free voxel editor. Okay, Cubicle's similar. It's like $100. It's got some slightly different features that I like a bit better. The main thing is it has a voxelizer, so you can bring in an OBJ and it'll voxelize it, and it'll retain the material and mesh colors, which are important because I'm trying to do like this whole palette swap technology with this thing. Anyway, so the meshes go in and they get voxelized, and then they get spit back out, and when they come out of Cubicle, Cubicle makes like a unique texture for every frame. Which is going to be, I figure is going to be like super difficult to deal with when I'm swapping frames in Unreal. Like, not only would I have to bring in the mesh for every frame, but I would have to like coordinate which texture. And there's just a ton of these like little tiny EDB like 32 by 32 textures. And if I wanted to do palette swaps, that would be impossible because the colors, depending on how many voxels of a certain color there are in each particular frame, the colors end up landing in a different location on the texture. So like trying to do a palette swap is impossible. So I needed a way to remap all of those frames back into a common texture, a common palette. So the voxelized frames come back into Max, and then I came up with a second tool which allows me to point at a directory full of these voxelized FBXs, and it loads each one in file by file, and then it looks at all the colors and puts those colors into an array, and then I give it a target texture, and it finds those matching or similar colors, the most similar colors it can, and then it adjusts the UVs for those color locations to map the new thing. I'm basically like remapping into a single texture. So I guess this would be an opportunity to talk about my second golden nugget of the night, is the thing that I learned doing arcade games, especially like when we were pitching like new and crazy stuff, is like the most important thing that I've found is to just get something on screen. Like get something up and working, even if it's not like the final implementation, even if it's sloppy, like just get it up there, because particularly when you're like pitching to your execs, or the execs that I was pitching to at the time, they couldn't really envision what it is like you're trying to explain. They have to see it, right? So one mistake I made on this project with this whole color thing is like I went down this 2-month-long road of like learning all about perception and color and how like all these color sorting algorithms work, and learning that the eye is more sensitive to green, so like if I'm going to do this color sorting thing, I have to account for that, and really there's like a real simple way to sort by color, but that's really not quite the way RIC, so you need to kind of go this other way. And like I'm doing all this research on all these formulas, and like very quickly like the first step is like I look at the math, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it, like that's easy. And then you get to the next step, and it's like, this is a little more math than I think I know, but after a while I kind of figured it out, and like, okay, I could sort that way. And then like very quickly, like the next step, like the next level of complexity in color sorting is like, I'm never going to be able to figure that out. It's like there's Greek in there, and it's just like beyond my education level. So I spent a lot of time, spun my wheels on that for a long, long time, because originally I was going to like try to paint in shading on the voxel characters, and then ultimately I was like, no, you know what? I'm just going to go like flat colors, and I'm just going to do like the dumb, simple algorithm to sort these colors, and that's what you see here. And I'm letting Unreal Engine do like all of the lighting and shading work, so no need to like art any lighting into the or paint any lighting into the characters. All right, so yes, what were we talking about? So we go in, we remap all of the stuff out of in Max, and then it spits it back out, and then it gets imported into Unreal. And those files, I told you they looked crazy. Actually, so there's no materials applied, so they don't look that crazy. But they end up looking like this, and the base material is, I think this is the right one. So the actual mesh in 3D Studio Max is colorized like this. So this allows me, like once it's remapped, I have, I guess we can call it a texture. It's all like created procedurally, but you can kind of see it here. Let's take a look at, I could very simply have just supplied a texture, but actually all of these bands, I'm using this, actually this is a material function I made. I'm doing this all algorithmically. This was another challenge. Like originally, you saw a few slides ago when I said doing personal projects is an opportunity to learn and expand your knowledge. the power of the material editor is in Unreal is just insane. It's like if you see some of the stuff that some of the really good guys do at Epic, like Ryan Brooks is one, and some of those other folks, like the magic that they're able to pull out of this material editor is insane. So I wanted to expand my knowledge of it. So I could have very simply just slapped a texture in there, and if I was following my last gold nugget of information, that would have been the fastest route to success. But I made a trade-off and decided to learn more about materials. So we can take a look at the material function here. So this is like, I don't even remember how this works. But so we get like a texture size, and then we determine how many rows. There's 16 rows, so we divide it up. And then there's actually this handy material function already in Unreal that generates a band, and so we offset it depending on which color we want. But then that allows us to do cool stuff like we can come up with all of these material instances. So there's some in here somewhere. Like if we wanted to do, let's see, I think this is the one we want. Like maybe this guy looks familiar. So you can see a little sloppy pixel right there. Yeah, so again, in the interest of trying to get something up and working, I didn't go back and clean up the voxelized characters in Cubicle. Really what should happen is like when I get around to like doing this for real, I'll go back and re-voxelize this stuff and actually go frame by frame and clean up, because the voxelizing thing isn't like super accurate. You saw some of the noise in the thing that I had done all those years ago. Even professional tools like Cubicle can have some issue with this stuff. So yeah, anyway, some cleanup that needs to be done. Let's see, maybe there's a couple other characters you might recognize. Well, I've got all the Street Fighter guys, right? Like there's Dan. I think Akuma's in here. Speaking of, so I have to watch myself. Like I said, I've been making games for a long time, and like maybe some old schoolers might recognize this guy from the game Bruce Lee, of course. Yeah, so that was the other part of this thing. Like, not only did I want to design a game that I would enjoy playing, but I wanted to kind of throw back to some of the games that I also played. So Bruce Lee on the Commodore 64, huge favorite. Yar Kung Fu, that was one of the first fighting games I loved. And I thought I had another, let's see, let's run up here a little bit. So it's kind of challenging working with this limited palette of colors, but I'm trying to get the most mileage out of what I can with some simple palette swaps. So, all right. Yeah, so ultimately, really, I would never, I may not use these characters in the actual game, because obviously there might be some licensing issues. But what they're good for is generating attention. Like when I go out there and tweet, a lot of people have said like, oh, wow, it looks like karateka. Oh, it looks like, Yar Kung Fu, or is it Kung Fu? So that generates hits. And there was one, let's see, what was the other one I wanted to show? I don't remember. Anyway, you get the idea. Okay, so that is the whole palletizing thing. Yeah, so yeah, the challenge, one of the big challenges with this is this animation does not play nice with the UE4 animation system. UE4 animation system is all skeletal based. So you can see the name of the project here is Mesh Swapper, because that's what I'm doing. Like I have a pawn, and every frame I swap in a new mesh, and a new mesh, and a new mesh. There's no skeletal animation. So I can't take advantage of all the like super awesome UE4 stuff like the state machine and all the cool blending and whatever. It's a very old school approach. So I had to come up, with my own animation system, which let's take a look at the Mesh Swapper pawn. And yeah, this is the main event graph here. So let's see, where to even begin? Maybe we should begin with the actual data format. Let's do that. So animation files in UE4, like I said, are skeletal based, and they support all these cool things like you can trigger events and blend and all that other good stuff. I just wanted to swap in frames, so I came up with this big giant struct. Let's look at that struct. Anim data right here. So the struct, basically, I have a name, the number of frames, which I don't think I actually even use, the actual meshes. So let's look at it down here. There we go. So the anim meshes, this is an array. It's an array of static meshes, so if I have 5 frames, I can just add 5 frames, and then I go pick my static meshes. I added an offset. I didn't really want to do this. I wanted a nice clean way to come out of Cubicle and right into Unreal, but for whatever reason, all of the different voxelizing tools seem to, they're not even production ready in this sense. Like, they don't really have a concept of like a common origin or scale. When I bring in, if I bring in the standing guy and I voxelize him, he's like a certain size. And that's because the volume that gets voxelized like defaults to something, right? If I bring in that same character, but now he's like in his crouch frame, and so he's compressed, it gets scaled up to match the size of the voxelizer. So it's like, and it gets offset depending on, where the character's like, leaning forwards or back. So it was this huge nightmare of like trying to figure out what the right scale of everything was and get it located. In the end, I did. This is part of the tedium of the whole process, is going into Cubicle and making sure everything's scaled 1 to 1 to 1. But I got fed up trying to figure out where the pivot was supposed to go, so now I just tweak it in here with an offset. Frame delay, that's how long the frame stays up on screen. And then if the animation is looping, you can loop it. If it's not a looping animation, then we can supply an animation that I almost said blends. It doesn't blend. It plays next. And then the damage, if it's an attack, then it does damage. And then collision. All right, so this is a fun story. When I first got to Epic, being a fighting game fan, UE4 had just launched. It had like just been announced, just launched, and Epic was supplying these templates. Like, we still have them today. Like Epic still has them today. First-person shooter template, third-person template, flying template, whatever. And I thought, hey, I'm going to make the fighting game template. Like, who wouldn't want to make a fighting game, right? And so, I did this whole thing like, hey, everybody, I'm going to do this. And I was met with skepticism, but I charged forward and very quickly ran into some roadblocks because my knowledge of UE4 was like basically non-existent at that point. Until I got into Epic, I'd never used Unreal in like a professional setting. So the thing that like really kind of tripped me up when I started this template thing was the collisions, because I want to do collisions a certain way, the old school way, of course, with big boxes or blocks, and I didn't know how to do that. So that project died pretty early on. So many years later now, I kind of have an idea of how to approach that. So we have some parameters here for the location of the collision, how large the collision of that thing is. So like we have head collision, body collision, leg collision, whatever. And that is defined by a special game mode, which, if I remember correctly, is probably under framework. And actually, let's open up the map. So we should have collision editor map. Let's not ruin all that. And if I hit play, hopefully this works. There we go. So this is a special game mode where I can select, I've got my main character, and then I just wanted to test to see that subclass characters work, so I have a subclass character. But anyway, we can load him up, and then we can pick one of his animations, like, I don't know, let's do the crouch. So he's starting the crouch. This is frame 0, frame 1, frame 2. So it's only a 2-frame animation. And then, we can see which collision volume we want to deal with. So, like, let's work on his legs. Oh, no, not the block. Let's do his legs. And, we can go ahead and, like, draw out a volume there. Why did it not draw? Okay, awesome. Let's try head. This should work. All right, I'll tell you what. Let's go to stance, because all this should work. Why is this not drawing? Oh, I know why it's not drawing. Because I turned it off the other day. Let's go back to the pawn. Let's go to our collision volumes. And we want to make sure that those are visible. Why are you not visible? I guess I have to do them one by one. Oh, because I'm playing. I have used Unreal before, I promise. Okay, that should work now. Alright, so let's go back and hopefully let's get our character. And we'll do our stance and there we go. Alright, so if we wanted to change the head collision, we can just draw. There we go. Like, I don't know, for whatever reason, if we just wanted we don't want his head down there. If we wanted to change his legs, like maybe we just want him to get hit on the front leg. And you can see that, we can update this frame by frame. Right now it's all placeholder stuff, so you're not seeing any of those things change except the one that we just did. But so yeah, you can see that's the new data. So that new data will get fed back into the data table. Now, if I was a smart programmer, I could probably figure out a way to get that data in there, like with a button press. But since I'm just an artist, a designer person, we're going super old school, and I'm just going to have to copy these things down and enter them in. So if you notice that these characters don't have collision on some of these animations, that's because I'm totally putting it off and not doing it right now. So anyhow, so yeah, let's see, still with me? All right. So let's see, what else do we want to see? I can show how the animation system kind of looks real quick. Let's go back to our pawn. So up here we have our mesh anim component. So, gosh, let's look at we've got our event graph up, got our movement graph. Let's see some of the stuff like I'm not even using. So here we go. This is like the movement graph, right? So we get movement in. We take input axis movement in. We determine if we're standing, if that's true. We figure out our facing. There's a whole thing like, am I facing left, am I facing right? And then we look at the input and compare that against 0 to determine which way we're going, because we want to apply a different walk speed forward than we do backwards, because you don't want anyone like, you don't want these guys like running away from each other. You want to give the attacker a little more advantage, make the game a little more aggressive. And yeah, so let's see, this is the actual animation that gets played. So this data table, so there's a variable called animation data. When we play an animation, it's associated with the next piece of the puzzle. We showed the struct. So that struct goes into the data table, which I was showing first. So these are all the different animations, right? So there's our stance animation. It's 12 frames long. Here are the meshes. Here's the offsets. I don't think there's actually any offsets on the stance because I did it correctly the first time. And so we have to update that data. So that happens, let's see, here. So we have a function that goes in. We have an enum with the list of animations, and then a big old switch, which goes in and says, go to the data table, get that data table name. All of the row names are named by the animation name. We set that row as the animation data, which gets spit back out as the anim data, which we can then use over here. Where's our movement graph? In the swap mesh function. This is a doozy. There we go. So we broke open the struct, and we set this as the updated animation. Okay, so we determine for each frame, we're basically going through and getting the delay. We pick the current frame, we get the static, we set the static mesh that's in the data table, and then we're setting this is that relative offset thing that I added just a couple weeks ago to deal with the pivot issue. And then I actually set the material every single frame. And there was a reason I did this, which I don't remember now, but it made sense at the time. And I think I wanted to ensure that the character was using the right material because there was like some sort of glitching going on every time the frame changed, since it was a new static mesh. And then all this stuff over here, basically this is all the collision data that gets updated. So we get the owning character, we're getting that collision, the head collision volume, we're getting the offsets, this trails all the way back to that struct, and we're setting the location and the scale. And then we go down the list, we do it for the body and the legs and what have you. So like once this is all done, it loops back around after a delay. So basically I took the for loop and I added a little delay in there, so that holds the frame of animation up there on screen for a little while. And we go on to the next. And then once we've run through all of our frames, we say, are we looping? If that's true, then play the loop function, which basically runs it through the thing again. Otherwise, we're going to get the out animation, and we'll play that. And it does the same thing. Like it gets the out animation from the data table and then runs through the whole thing over and over and over. So lots of spaghetti, but it works. And down here is basically the similar thing, but instead of running during the game, This runs specifically during the collision editor mode, so that I can. You saw me like tapping the buttons and like framing through frame by frame by frame. So this basically is like a subset of that larger animation. Just work on a key press. So I should have said in the very beginning that you can shout out questions as you have them. You've all been like so patient and quiet. We can do question and answers here in a second. I guess the last final thing I'll show off, just because I like it, and I'll try to spin this into another nugget of information, a golden nugget. But when you're prototyping, pitching, trying to get attention, eye candy means so much. It really does. So since I started tweeting about this, I've been doing like a screenshot Saturday every week for the past like 5 or 6 weeks or something. The initial stance animation got like a ton of hits, right? And then like each week it kind of like decreased. I didn't get as like much traction. And then I posted, actually I think I made a map just to show this off, so we'll load that. Where is it? What did I call it? Is it in here? No, did I delete? Oh, this is it, level test, effects test. Don't save it. So this is our special effect here. So I posted this the other week, and it started getting like a lot more hits again, because like people just like shiny stuff, like they do. If you can't make something shiny, my rule is then you make it glow. If you could do both, even better. And that is like a rule that has like withstood the test of time. I never spoke about this to anybody at Epic, but I think that's the thing that like impressed me with Gears of War so much, was like not only was everything like hyper detailed, but when they first did their promotional materials about the game, it was like, look at these shiny metal surfaces and look at that reflective water, and the guns have like this gorgeous glow, and oh my gosh, it was incredible. So yeah, I dare anyone to defy me that people like shiny things. So yeah, that's my little Hadouken effect there. So again, this was another opportunity to not only, again, I was trying to generate interest and kind of kick my numbers back up. Got to increase those numbers. But I love doing special effects. The King of Bling slot machine was like as flashy as I could possibly make it with the technology at the time, and I think that's a large part of why it was like so successful, because it was just like gold and diamonds and flashes everywhere. So this. I guess we can go into this for a second if you can stay with me for a few more minutes. This is largely a material effect. So where did I even put this stuff? Here we go. So it's 3 frames of animation. This is probably, right, just looks like a little lump, but it's roughly fireball shaped. And so all of the magic really happened. It is a mesh swapper. I created a special version of the mesh swapper tech. So the mesh swapper thing like largely works with the character. This I have like a pared down version because I wanted to do mesh swap background elements as well. So like I wanted to have like Street Fighter Mortal Kombat did back in the day, like they'd have like monks in the background like slowly waving back and forth, or like trees. I wanted to do like voxel animations of that. So we can look at this blueprint here, and yeah, it's pretty. I have like a very simple version of the swap mesh. And like I said, the majority of the magic happens in the material. Got to remember to stop playing. So we can take a look at this. And again, this is a lot of fun. This is the material instance. That's no good to anybody. Let's look at this. So looks a little crazy. Let's turn on real time. Like you can see, it's like doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at it like this. But basically, what's happening is it's a triplanar projection of this noise texture here, and then that actually scrolls, so it pans through the static mesh, and then we've got this little faceted normal map here, so that each one of these things you can kind of see, that little sort of like refraction distortion going on. So we do some refraction. And then there's like this gradient texture that kind of like flows across it in waves as well. Again, trying to like simulate that old school like special effect look. And then so that kind of like weird wobbling that you see there, that's all done with world position offset. And basically, I've got this gradient here, and I've got it set to basically pan across the mesh at a certain frequency, like a real low frequency there. So you can see it like popping. I think I'm doing some, seal. You see the seal node right here, the sealing node. So I'm basically like, rather than it like smoothly undulating, it like just pops to position and back to try to, again, like capture that old school feeling of like the old Street Fighter Mortal Kombat sprites. Like, they would like pop on and off visually. And I actually did like, I forget where it is now. I think this is it here. If I set this to 0, then hopefully I'm not a liar. Let's see if this works. May need to recompile. What that is supposed to do, maybe I unhooked it because I didn't like it so much, but it was supposed to blink it, basically. So old school video game hardware didn't have like transparency and stuff, so the way you do it is through like a stipple pattern effect and like alternate frames, like blinking it on and off. So I was trying to emulate that, but didn't quite look that good. So I'm taking some artistic license here and just keeping it on all the time. So do I need to save that again? Probably. And it is a material instance, and the material instance is we've got set to like this red yellow color. So anyhow, that's kind of where it's at. So for the future, I'm just going to keep working on this thing in my spare time. And let's go back to the main thing. We can kind of look at it again. What was it called? I don't even remember the name of the level anymore. There it is. Oh, and of course we can see, now I've totally broken it. All right, so something we did busted it, but you can see the collisions happening. I think I had hooked up the fireball. I did start the basics of the collision stuff, so you can see this. Is it there? It's not even there anymore. All right. Oh, because the jump frame has no thing. All right, awesome. So in the space of demoing this project, I totally busted it. Sweet. So I guess that's a good time to say that is that, and if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them on the project, on stuff that I've worked on, or whatever. But again, no questions about Magic Leap I'm going to answer, so sorry about that. Yes, sir.
So how do you decide what plane or angle to put the camera on? Like right now,
Oh, yeah.
it's totally like, seems like flat.
Yes.
Like almost like Chronica.
Yep.
Which was
Yep.
something I haven't heard of before. That's awesome. But that was actually my only complaint about Breaking One. There's no product in that. So that means that's just for you too. But how did you decide what angle to put there?
So again, in the interest of getting something up and running quickly, I banged together a quick camera actor, which, where is that? BP camera right here. And all this really is so I was testing out like an orthographic projection or a near orthographic projection and a more perspective type camera. And it's on, I thought it was on a spring arm. Yeah, there we go. And I've got 2 collision planes to just basically keep there's probably a smart math way of doing this, of like keeping the characters a certain distance apart. But again, in the interest of time, like I just put a couple of colliders up there. And if the characters get far enough back and hit it, then they don't go any further. And basically what the camera does is, I thought it was more simple than this, but on begin play, we get all of the fighting characters. We put that into an array. We get the first one, and that becomes the first character. We get the second one, that becomes the second character. And then somewhere in here, we basically get their location and their distance, their horizontal and vertical distance apart, and then just move the camera back, by some factor. There's like some numbers I could fudge it with. So that they're always in frame, or almost always in frame. So again, this is like the most simplest implementation. I spent probably like a week like really tweaking things out and like adding more variables and like more functions to kind of smooth things out, and like what if the character jumps and how much should he be in frame and all this. And it got like really, really complicated, and I was like, what, this can wait until later. Like, let's just strip it all back to like the core functionality. It works for now. I can make GIFs and post them on Twitter with this. So good enough. But so then the other component of your question was, it's like dead straight on. It's very easy using the spring arm component to add some lag. So depending on like if the right hand or the left hand player like moves and this one stays, then the camera will kind of cheat, start moving that way, but you can add lag, and you'll get a little more bit of depth, that way. So I do want to explore doing that, which actually takes me back to Street Fighter the movie. So when we worked on this project, crazy deadlines because we had to get the arcade game done by the time the movie came out, and we actually missed our window a little bit. But we had realized towards the end that hey, this game just isn't like panning out the way we wanted. It's like it's not really feeling that great. It's not really true to Street Fighter, which was like a major disaster in my eyes. So we started looking for ways like, well, what can we do to make this thing cooler, whatever. And one of the programmers had come up with this way to like basically simulate this like dynamic camera, and was able to like scale the sprites. Even though the characters were side by side, he could cheat the camera to one side and then scale the characters to give this like sense of depth. This was all before like actual real 3D, so it was all like 2D fakery, and it looked so cool, and we were like so excited by this. We're like, okay, if we put this out there, this is going to be awesome. Like no one's doing this stuff, right? But we were already behind on our delivery schedule, so like that didn't go in. But anyway, fun little story there. It seems like all the stuff that never makes it out is always like the best stuff, right? Like the games that never get made, it's going to be the best game ever, right? But anyhow. So any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. When you do mesh swapping, is there any performance penalty?
I haven't seen one yet. So I did like a little bit of profiling, and like the character right now, I don't even know. We can take a look at how many frames he is. But so it, quite honestly, I have not dug that deep into it, but the character looks to be about like just over 20 megs or something like that, which with all that mesh data, it just doesn't seem like a lot at all. And I haven't noticed any hitches bringing the files in, and I think maybe what's going on is because I'm bringing them in on demand, it's not like storing all of them at once, right? Because like every time I swap animations, it's like, okay, what's the animation? What are the 5 to 12 frames I need, or 3 to, and it brings them right in, and it seems pretty quick. So there's probably going to come a day where this is all going to like break horrendously, and like I'll figure out that all this is like I'm going to need like a smart person to fix it for me. But for now, it seems to be working. So, and since it's a hobby project with like no deadline, and it's really like a learning exercise, and this is I don't really have many other like hobbies or outside interests besides video games. So like this is what I do for fun. So.
How many like approximately triangles do you have per character?
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, let's take a look. I'll tell you exactly. So let's look at Mr. Proto Man here. So he is 13,000 over 13,000 verts and like 4,500 triangles. So the reason, so every one of these little facets that you see on here, so those look the way they do. They're being highlighted because of that little face map, normal map. But each one of those little quads that you see is an actual polygonal quad because of the way that the voxels have to be colored in order to work with the whole palletizing system that I wanted to do. So now when coming out of Cubicle, you can optimize the voxelized meshes. And so like we've got like this chunk right here, right? Like you can planarize that totally. And I could do a triplanar projection in order to do this. But then that would be extremely difficult to map to the whole palletizing thing that I've got going on.
Can you put it in a wireframe?
Oh yeah, sure. Over here. So he is, it is a manifold mesh, so you're only seeing the front, the outward facing normals. There are no like faces on the interior of the thing. That's one of the steps in Cubicle. The process in Cubicle is bring in the FBX that comes out of Max, voxelize it, scale it, position it, map it to the palette, and then you can do what's called a solidify, and it basically fills the voxel volume, makes it a solid thing, and then I go out and export it. And then that makes it so that the interior of the mesh like doesn't actually get generated. Otherwise, the vert count would be like double, and the face count would be double. So, but it's all manual, and is quite honestly the reason I haven't done more animation, because it's super tedious to like go and click all of these buttons like one by one by one and punch in these numbers. it would be really super nice if Cubicle did like had some simple scripting language or like a macro thing where I could just, point it at a file and click a button and it'll go pow, pow, and spit it back out. But yeah. So what else? Other questions? Yes.
What do you would recommend for people that want to start a personal project?
Well, gosh, I mean, things are quite different now when it comes to like starting personal projects, and have been for a number of years. But like way back in the day, it was a lot more difficult to do a personal project, right? So now, you have all the tools. You have Unity, you have Unreal. There's I think Photoshop is relatively cheap. You can use GIMP is like fairly. It's not widely used, but it's usable, right? If you need to do 2D stuff. I think Visual Studio is free if you're an engineer. There's like a free enterprise version, yeah, and that works perfectly fine, right? So, just get started and do stuff. I mean, if you've never made anything before, the learning resources that are out there now in the form of like video and written documentation and whatever is it's incredible, right? To sound like the old guy and like, I wish we had these resources when I was young. It was difficult. It was really hard.
How do you use people over Magic?
Primarily for the voxelizing stuff. So you can voxelize a model in Magica Voxel, but there did not or does not appear to be a way to actually control the size of the voxelizing volume. So again, in that example I gave of like the stance animation versus like the crouch, Magica Voxel does the same thing. It'll scale the incoming mesh to that volume. So you get a crouch that's like enormous, but there's no real like quick and easy way, if there is even a way, to like scale it to the proper size. Like you would have to somehow know the size of the mesh beforehand and then set your voxel size. And so it is tedious in Cubicle as well, but there are at least numerical inputs. Like if I bring in the crouch and I notice that it's huge, I can go to the scale, the transform window, and it says, oh, I can see that the scale was set to like 1.64, and I just zero or level it out or whatever to 1111, and now I know it's the right size. So, but otherwise, like people are doing awesome stuff with Magica Voxel. It's free, which is a bonus. It does have animation features, but I think that's more for if you're going to be doing frame by frame traditional like voxel animations. That was the other thing with this project too. Like, again, I love voxel art, but I think because of the way that Magica Voxel does things and the fact that it is so widespread because it's free, a lot of the voxel artwork that you see out there, like characters tend to be like a very similar height. And like the quick unscientific analysis I did of the situation is like characters are roughly like, 30 to 40 some voxels high or whatever. And so like I want to do something different. Like I wanted to do voxels, but I wanted to look different and be different. And so I wanted voxels. I ended up on a scale where each voxel is 5 centimeters tall. And so that gives me the particular resolution and sort of scale of the character there. And I can control that better in Cubicle. And I had paid for Cubicle many years ago, so I figured I might as well get my money's worth. Was there another question? Yes?
Yeah. Do you use game design documents?
No.
No, it's like for this game.
No. No. So even professionally, so starting out, I used to love writing game design documents. Like, hey, I finally made it. I'm in the game industry. Like, look at all my cool ideas, right? Like, look at this giant stack of paper I generated, and whatever. And like nobody reads that stuff, and except me. And then then when it comes time to make the game, like things change so rapidly. Now that's for like I would say small scale like indie projects. Now huge games like God of War, for example, that just came out, right? Massive undertaking with hundreds, if not thousands of people. Like they need some sort of documentation to like set the direction and make sure everyone's like on board. But for like personal projects, part of the fun for me is just like hacking away and figuring things out. I also knew what I wanted to do. I've been thinking about this project for like a long time, right? Like the original Punch animation I did when I went indie back in like 2013, right? So I had a pretty good idea of what I want to do. There's lots of precedent for what a fighting game is and what I like. So in that case, no. But I'll jot down, like if I have an idea, I will jot that down and just like, the general sort of like theme and some of the systems that I might want to make, but like nothing like really hardcore specific unless I'm like really going to pursue it.
On the concerning like on the IPs and stuff like that, when you approach that with the company or opportunity, how do you go about like determining like how you're gonna write it and stuff like that? Do you approach with a lawyer or no?
So that's an excellent question. That's a real hard one. So
How much do you have to flesh it out? Make this read enough, stuff like that.
So ever since the whole "I own your dreams" speech that I sat through, I have been really reticent to pitch games, particularly if it's like not my position within the company. Like there are people that get paid to do that, and they have just as many, if not more, ideas than I do. Right? It's great to be part of a company that opens up the, and says, hey, everyone can contribute. But like we'll talk about Epic, where I previously was, right? Like huge company, folks working there that are incredibly skilled and talented at what they do. The company has a vision and a plan for the direction they're going. So like the types of things that I'm interested in doing, like wouldn't necessarily fit into their business plan. So like, that IP is a thing that I'm going to hold on to for a later date when I can work on it, right? That's a tough question for me to answer. I think it's going to vary like company to company. Like I said, some companies have like open game jams where anyone can, in fact, I think that's how Fortnite started. Like after Gears of War, they had a company-wide game jam, and the one that like really sort of lit the fire was this, fortress building defense thing, and which turned into Fortnite. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I don't have like real great advice on that, how to pitch something to a big company. A lot of them.
Really the pitch, more like reserving, making sure you have connections, stuff like that.
Yeah, if you're talking about a company that you're within, that's like, if you're trying to pitch a company that you're not a part of, ain't gonna happen.
You're trying to just make sure like you're doing your own thing, and you're saying like you wrote down on paper,
Yeah.
this is my project.
Yeah.
That stuff.
Yeah, are you saying like when you start working for a company,
Uh-huh.
that's your personal project?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
not necessarily like
yeah.
pitching into the company. That's also good info.
Okay. Oh, you're talking about when you're carving out your IP.
Or
Like
just-
what level do you need to take
like
it?
a possible IP, you just want to make sure that you can carve it out while
Mhm.
you're working. You don't have to worry about that. You have an idea of like the inklings of these things.
So in my history, like the fact that the documents that I've filled out in the past, like you state like, okay, this is what I call this thing, whether it's like, fighting prototype or, some code name or whatever. And this is like the rough idea. It's a fighting game that may, it incorporates these ideas or that ideas or whatever and what have you. And this is the year that I came up with this, right? Like that's typically enough. And as long as you're not working on something that is, as long as you don't start working on that at the company with company materials on company time,
of course.
then you should be like pretty clear. If you feel strongly about it, I guess you could engage in a lawyer, but that's probably a bit premature until you like have something concrete. All right. Yes.
Material layer is pretty daunting. What was like the difficulty that you took to figure out the whole band and color swapping and stuff like that?
Oh, the material thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, gosh, how did I start on that? Well, I knew that I wanted to do the palette swap thing because I was just going to start with one character, so I wanted to not have to generate multiple characters. And I wanted to have a large library of animations that I could then say, like, well, these 20 animations make this character, and maybe, these 20 animations make this character. And even though they look the same, maybe they play and look differently, right? And so I needed to be able to do the palette swap thing, and I realized that once I spit out my first file in Cubicle, I was like, this is not going to work at all because of the whole texture deal. I'm going to have to remap this somehow. And so then, yeah, I figured. So originally I started out with like each band was a gradient because I think I had mentioned like I was going to kind of paint in lighting into the voxel thing. And so like each band, like red went from like red to almost black, and orange and yellow and whatever. Ultimately, I simplified that, and so now I knew that I had to create bands. I knew that I could do it with a texture, but then if I wanted to palette swap, I would have to load in a new texture. And just for fun, I kind of got on this kick where I was trying to do as much material work procedurally as I could. So let's look at his material again. I think this is it. Oh wait, let's look at the material instance. So here we go. So, this very easily, instead of all these bands here, this very easily could have been one texture that I just loaded in. But then if I wanted to tweak a color, my guy that looks a lot like Ken, his hair isn't yellow enough, I would have to go back to Photoshop and spit it back in and take a look and whatever. But now with this, I can go and change it to whatever color I want on the fly. So knowing that was a goal, I just kind of hacked away at it until it worked. And it's amazing what material functions are already supplied in Unreal, and some of them are kind of hidden away in certain folders as well. But they had one called generate band, and I was like, oh wait, this sounds pretty much exactly like the thing that I need, so let's see what it does. And I plugged in and it's like, okay, now if I can figure out what the resolution of my texture is, then I can figure out the offset, and okay, I just need to create 16 of these things in order to make it. So it's probably well more expensive than doing a texture, but it's a lot more flexible. Right. And I can always, if I figure out oh my gosh, the shader cost is insane because I'm generating all this stuff on the fly, then I can always just say, texture, off we go. But I think if we go ahead and play this, if I go into let's go here. Gosh, that is scary that broke so hard. Let's see, where's my material? There we go. So yeah, it doesn't look like the material's that complex, right? If it was bad, it would be in the bad red zone there, or the extremely bad zone.
Follow-up question then.
Yeah.
Would you say that, I guess within not similar techniques, you could do something similar for 3D sprites that are made in Unreal?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, you certainly could. Actually, there's a guy out there that's doing a 2D fighting game template that is oh, you know him, really? It's amazing. Is he a Russian guy or something?
I know he's somewhere on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
But we talk to him. Yeah, in Turkey. Yeah, but we talk to him almost every day.
His stuff is amazing. It's incredible. Yeah. And I think last I saw, I haven't kept up recently, but I think he's taking the sprites and breaking out each color into a separate texture maybe, and then I think he's doing a similar thing where he's tinting those little pieces procedurally in order to do because he has a whole palette thing that you can do similarly. Yeah. So yeah, there's probably a few different ways to do it. But, yeah.
We have an old build of this template from a year and a half or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was already insane.
Yeah.
That guy is going at it.
Yeah, I follow him on Twitter, and every time I see him post, I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
I gotta get going again.
Yeah. He has no sleep. Every time I talk to him, he's like, man, I'm so done.
Yeah, it's hard.
Here working, I was like, yeah, because he works during the day. He does that on his spare time.
It's hard, you go to work every day, you do your hours, and sometimes you have crunch, and then coming home and trying to work on it. Personal projects aren't for everybody. And certainly, there's a lot of talk about crunch in the business, and then to come home and impose crunch on yourself, basically, it's not for everybody, and but for me, it's just what I've kind of done, so keep doing it. But all right, cool. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, all right, more. I love it.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So about having a personal project, I'm kind of using it more as a portfolio piece.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I find it hard with the scope, I guess I set out to finish it, and the advice I got at BBC was just make something good, finish it, polish it.
Yeah. Yeah, scope is definitely an issue. So, and I knew that a fighting game was huge scope, right? Because I've done a few. But I was like, you know what? In previous projects, I always set a deadline. Excuse me. And so I'd say okay, I'm going to start on this thing, I'm going to work on it, and then 6 months, that's it, I'm going to be done. And it never happens, right? Because life gets in the way and whatever. And I would always get so frustrated with myself. And for this one, I was like, you know what? This is open-ended. I'm just going to keep on working on it forever. And right now, it looks like a traditional 2D one-on-one fighting game. But once I get more of the sort of the core stuff working, I could change it into something more like that Bruce Lee game I mentioned, where it's more like a side-scrolling, beat 'em up type thing or whatever. And I feel like that would be smaller scope and easier, but I'm sure like once I get into it, like I would realize, no, you have to create a whole world like for the character to play in and all these extra animations. Like maybe it's easier to just go back to the fighting game thing. So for now, this is what it looks like.
Fighting game battle royale.
Yeah, right. I could take those collision volumes and just like slowly. put them in. So yeah.
Probably good melee-based battle royale. It's like Absolver, but like Absolver in another world.
Yeah.
Would you ever consider, like, if you got this to a point, bringing on people for a team? Not me, but
Yeah, I would love to. So actually, I've had a few folks contact me, animators actually, a couple of animators that express interest in getting in there and doing stuff. So I don't know if that's a compliment, like, hey, what you've got going looks cool, I would love to do some animation in that style for you, or if they're looking at it and going like, dude, you need some animation help, let me get in there. So, because like I said, like I am not a like trained animator, but you know, I can make stuff move. So, yeah. So I've had offers like that, and then there was an engineer, a programmer guy that expressed interest. But like for right now, since you know I don't work on it every single day, like I wouldn't want someone else to commit their time if I couldn't commit all of my time. But it was encouraging to see people get excited about it. So yeah.
How disorienting would it be if you put Voxel in VR?
I would imagine that all the same rules would apply to all the same VR rules apply, right? Like actually that's a really interesting question, because like when VR like first started to hit, I kind of expected like some of the low-hanging fruit to be that people would take their traditional game styles, like a fighting game, and then like just like make the VR thing like a viewer into that world. So like you're not necessarily like moving around through the world like many VR games, but like you're standing there watching like this game, right? And we really didn't see that, and I don't know, maybe it just like didn't work, but yeah. So what was that game? Gunfire did it, and it was like a third-person exploration game.
There's one to go mouse or something over there.
There's that one too. Yeah, that one looks super cool. See, I was hoping to see more stuff like that, but yeah. But anyway, specific to like, I don't think there's anything particular about voxel art in VR that is negative, other than the one thing that I've noticed, particularly with the resolution that I'm going with. If those stupid boxes. If I blow this up full screen, like it gets hard to read. It really does, and it's a bit of a cause for concern. But I wonder if you're walking through an environment and you've got a guy that's 5 centimeters per voxel, and maybe he looks like really cool over there against the wall, but you walk up to him and he's just like this, disorienting swirl of voxels. Like I don't know, maybe it's hard to read. Maybe it's disorienting. I don't know.
I like the way it's ironic. Like I was using the golfing emulator,
Mm-hmm.
and in Smash game, their stages are like little tabletop things almost when you go into it,
Mm-hmm.
and their sizes. So long as you leave the camera alone on the controller, because that will screw you up. Like you're just pausing and you just walk over to it,
Uh-huh.
get close to it. It's like looking at little action figures.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that kind of works as long as the camera stays static. But yeah, I can see how bad it could get if you started like letting them change their FOV and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So now, like, the term voxel art encompasses like a lot of different styles too, right? Like, on the one end, you've got Minecraft, which, yeah, the world is voxel, but like the characters are really just like skin meshes. They're like rigid meshes even. Like I could see that working because it's really like sort of static. The look that I was going for was like this, really noisy effect of like the characters actually swimming through a live voxel field, and that's why they kind of like jitter and make noise all over the place. So yeah, I think that would be like I said, I think it would just be hard to read. So, yeah.
Are you actually considering instead of a death animation kind of like old voxels kind of part?
Yeah, so that's an interesting. That several people have said like, oh, I hope when you punch them, like they fall to pieces or like they fly apart and come back. So yeah, I think we could totally do that. Because like each one of these faces is like a separate face mapped entity. So I could like get the location of the impact and then do world position offset to kind of like blow the facets apart and bring it back. But then so this is like really super particular, but at that point, that says to me that you are playing with action figures. You're playing with an object, and these aren't like, you're not in a voxelized world where these are like the real living inhabitants of the voxelized world. This is like super geeky stuff, but I've thought about it quite a lot. So like, you know, yeah, it's some like, if you punched a guy and it was the final punch and they died and they like shattered all over the place, it looks super awesome. There's like examples of folks doing this stuff out there, and it's like, it gets noticed. Like people see that and it's like, oh my gosh, that's eye candy. It's like amazing, right? But like there's just sort of this psychological aspect, like border that I don't want to cross with it right now. Like I almost envision this as like, you know, video games back in the day, 2D stuff, you know, even when it was low res, was like, those were like living characters. They were pixelized representations of characters.
You said more of an art style rather than an object.
Right. So I'm trying to keep it kind of like in that vein. So, yeah. For now, I don't know. If people lose interest and enough, you know, there's enough noise, I'll be like, all right, fine. Let's blow them apart.
A lot of things could work this way.
Yeah. So like, I want to do, you know, like little spurts and, you know, sweat flying off, like lots of little particles. Yeah, which brings up an interesting. Sorry, I'm keeping you guys here super long, but I could keep talking forever. So scale was like super important to me, and you know, coming up with what I thought was the right resolution for the characters. But then there are elements that like maybe you want smaller than 5 centimeters per voxel. So like things, I decided that thin objects or transparent objects like blades of grass or, you know, like liquid, like, you know, splashes or whatever, those can be 2 centimeters per, you know, can be voxels at like 2 centimeters because they're small and thin. And then the other issue I have is like, as I create backgrounds and environments that are, you know, deep, you know, the 5 centimeter thing, like pretty soon, like you're going to lose that. So maybe like the next rule is physical structures can be 10 centimeters per voxel, right? And if you're a mountain, maybe like 100 centimeters per voxel. So I don't know, I'm going to have to play with that a little bit, because it kind of breaks the rule that I was trying to adhere by like, you know, keeping everything locked to the grid, right? So, I don't know, we'll see. There was another question. Yeah.
You know how most of our games have their own gimmicks that make them distinct. Like in Justice 3, you could go to different maps, use a world around you. Mortal Kombat has your stances and your finishers,
right,
so forth and so forth. Would the voxel style guys sort of shape your gimmick, or is it just some idea that you're like, hey, that's cool, let me try to put it in, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work?
Yeah, so that's a really great one. So I would say, I don't know that I really have that much of a gimmick other than like, I'll call it a hook. The hook is that it's like, this is old school fighting game, right? Like, I guess nowadays, so back in the day, like you didn't even have to know a special move to win. Like if you knew each character's library of animations and you could read them, you knew what animation to counter with, right? Like which attack. And that was like, that's the kind of gameplay that I really enjoyed back in the day. You know, I'm probably one of the last people that enjoy that, but you know, this is my game, so this is what I'm doing. And so that's kind of the hook, like the old school, I guess nowadays they call that footsie, right? Like, you know, if you are adept at the standard set of moves, then, you know, you can win. So it's more, I guess the hook is a footsie game. And yeah, and the voxel thing is just like, I like it. It seems to get attention, and like I said, this is my last crack at it before I never do voxels ever again if this bombs, so whatever. Okay. All right, cool. Well, it's 10 o'clock. I appreciate you all for letting me rant and rave for the last, you know, hour and a half, whatever it's been, but I really enjoyed coming out. Thank you very much, and I hope to participate in more of the user groups going forward. Oh, and one final thing, can I take a picture of the room just for my own satisfaction? Yeah, here we go. All right. I have to, you know, here we go. Everyone smile. All right. Great. Awesome. Thank you very much. So my wife is going to ask. Yeah, my wife was going to ask, so, like, you know, was it cool? And I was like, yeah, look at all these people that showed up.
Thank you guys. Problem?
Oh,
I don't know if we're gonna have time for a demo. I mean, but if you want to speak about your project.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry, man. I totally forgot you were on.
No.
Can you just put up my Twitter? I'll just sort of.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'll have my
Oh, yeah. I might as well say. Follow me on Twitter.
Yes.
At Alan Noon.
At Alan Noon. Real quick, guys, so you guys know, after this meetup, I think this is the last one that we're gonna have in this space. All the other meetups for Make Games Miami moving forward are gonna be at the main campus at FIU. So it's closer. It's further up north. Yeah. Yeah, then you know that.
Actually,
Yo.
same rooms, computer science?
No, this was actually gonna be in a different room in the Mark building on the entrance of 16th Street and 107.
Oh, no, once I get there.
You got it. You got it. I'll let you know.
So a lot better.
It's in a nicer place.
Oh,
Can I ask you?